Many video game soundtracks have the appeal to be enjoyed as recreational listening, and to some people have the power to influence their own musical tastes. You can be exposed to a wide variety of musical genres through this medium, and in some cases just through one game. Whether you're a fan of rock, jazz, hip-hop, orchestral, ambient, or, But when we look at the construction of the music itself, its relation to the rest of the soundtrack and the game it belongs to, can we further examine what exactly makes it so great? If we dig deeper into the intricacies of music theory and composition, is there something more that meets the, ear? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Mario Kart 8. As well as being incredibly polished in every other aspect, the music is where it really shines. We won't be analyzing every single track, as we would probably be here till space and time collapse, but we'll look at one track in particular, as it does a lot of establishing techniques used throughout the soundtrack. Before we dive into some single track analysis though, let's look at a few points regarding the soundtrack as a whole. One of the unique qualities Mario Kart 8's soundtrack has is its diversity in instrumentation. The game features a wide variety of course settings, ranging from a castle circuit, an airport circuit, a cloud circuit, the sand circuit, the circuit. In almost every track that features a unique setting, a new instrument is introduced to help support the theming, whether as a prominent melody part or just subtly as backing. Here are just a few examples. The melody in the midsection of the Wild Woods is performed on the tin whistle, an instrument commonly associated with the Celtic music of Western Europe. Dragon Driftway introduces the melody of the Eru, a bowed Chinese string instrument. Swamp Ruins features the use of the Bonang from an Indonesian set of pitched percussion instruments called the Gamelan. Here's an example of what it sounds like and where it plays in Swamp Ruins. We could honestly sit here and go on forever, but you get the point, right? You've got it. In these three songs alone, you've got instruments with all different real-world backgrounds, and the soundtrack continues this trend throughout. Amongst all this variety, the game does establish a central set of instruments as its main focus of the soundtrack, but we'll get to that in just a minute. What takes the soundtrack to the next level is the abundance of live recorded instruments. There are so many intricacies to the way a real player performs, like small imperfections in rhythm, pitch, and dynamics. What you get is the player emotion, and this is even more apparent when the parts are exposed and not within an ensemble. It sounds more natural as a result, and when it comes to writing for real instruments, that's always a good thing. Or you could just be like, nah, slap some auto-tune on that shit, 10 out of 10! Despite all the diversity, the game falls back on an instrumental setup that it establishes as the focus of the soundtrack right at the beginning of the game, and that is the big band setup. A standard big band setup contains the following instruments: a drum kit, bass, piano, and rhythm guitar as the rhythm section, which accompanies brass and saxophones. And this is exactly what we've got in Mario Kart 8's main theme, with the addition of a melody and backing synth. This instrumentation is also the primary setup used in the circuit race tracks, with decorative additions around it to create a unique flavor for each one. The soundtrack is performing this careful balancing act between diversity and consistency in the instrumentation. Jumping back to the start of the main menu, the brass kicks everything off, but it's the introduction of the funky bass that brings us to the next point. Take a listen. It's at this point that you realize this isn't just a soundtrack, it's a performance! One could argue that most modern video game music could be described as a performance, but I wouldn't say it's the same kind of performance. A lot of big budget games these days tend to go with this orchestral immersive sound, and it's always executed very well. Well, most of the time. Take the soundtrack from Skyrim, for example. Definitely an incredible performance to behold, but it's more like something you would dress up in a suit and tie at the Royal Albert Hall. Well, with old people trying to get their seats all like... Oh, sorry, excuse me. Whereas Mario Kart 8 is like... soundtrack are improvised sections, and this is somewhat rare for video game music. There are examples of dedicated solos and small improvisations throughout the soundtrack, and it really does create this feeling that you've sat down not only to play the game, but also to enjoy the show. The opening theme has been composed in a way that lets these performances shine through. The light texture of the backing synth and the rhythm guitar allow the occasional guitar solos to be at the forefront of everything. The soundtrack as a whole is very much melody dominated. All these tracks are composed in a way that allow the melody to come through over the accompaniment. None of them aim for atmosphere and immersion, and none allow the melody to be clouded by texture, barring a few minor exceptions. And it wouldn't be a modern Nintendo soundtrack without a little bit of nostalgia added into the mix. For those of you who don't know, this is the main theme of the game that kickstarted the whole series, Super Mario Kart. This inclusion really brings home the idea that this is the next generation of Mario Kart. It's been upgraded. It's transformed. It's great foreshadowing of what's coming up, hinting at remastered music for the returning tracks. Another thing the composers have made good use of is repetition. There may be a notion that extensive use of repeating phrases and sections in music might be considered lazy writing, but this just isn't the case. See, what the repetition does is it ingrains an idea into the listener's mind, which in turn allows the composer to expand upon said idea and introduce variations to keep the listener's interest. This is what we call a motif. If a composer throws too many new ideas at the listener in a short amount of time, music can become too convoluted and loses any theming or structure. Let's look at one of the more prominent examples from Mario Kart 8, Sunshine Airport. So, a melody is established, followed by a variation in pitch alone. After this, the strings take the end of the previous melody and expand upon it with a new crotchet phrase and slightly altered pitches. The melody established at the start returns, but now it's in a different key and on a different instrument. It then mimics what the first melody did, adding a variation in pitch. You get the idea. The whole melody for this song came from one simple 4-bar phrase that is established right at the start. So, repetition, it's a creative tool. You okay with it? Good. Okay with it? Good. 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 Back to the main theme, which features a lot of repetition and variation. What we also have here is a technique known as call and response. A phrase is played as a question, and then another phrase acts as the response, usually played by a different set of instruments. Call and response is used in a few of the tracks, one being Water Park, and is an effective way to create memorable passages and melodies. The final point we'll be making about the main theme, which is relevant to the soundtrack as a whole, is the use of modulation. Modulation is the process in which the music changes from one key to another. I'm sure you're all familiar with what this sounds like.
To more than I can be. You raise me up.
We'll be going really deep into some music theory here, so there'll be quite a bit of explaining to do. Also, just bear in mind this is just a theory at the end of the day, so although it may be possible within the laws of music, it may not actually be what the composer set out to do. Regardless, here we go! The main theme's harmony is based upon the Mixolydian scale on G sharp. You may be familiar with the concept of major and minor scales. But there are also scales known as modes. There are 7 different modes, each with their own unique sequence of intervals, and you can find them by playing the white notes on a keyboard. For example, if we play C to C, this is known as C major, but it's also known as the Ionian scale. With these modes, you can take the intervals and start on any note. So if we look at the Phrygian mode, which is found by starting on E, we can then transpose this on C, giving us the C Phrygian. Back over to Mario Kart, and we're in the G sharp Mixolydian. Jazz as a genre makes a lot of use of modal scales, so it seemed fitting for this big band-inspired track to use one too. As we progress through the first section, we modulate to the B mixolydian for 2 bars at the end of an 8-bar phrase. Now we've actually skipped an important point here, so let's jump right back to the start. We actually don't start in G-sharp mixolydian. We actually start in E. In this first section, we've already got 3 changes of key. In the next section, we have even more modulation and passing accidental chords. It's this controlled madness of modulation and irregular chord sequences that really makes Mario Kart 8's sound unique. Very few soundtracks can pull this kind of writing off without just sounding like raw cheeks. This use of modulation continues through the entire soundtrack. Just a few examples being Water Park, and Shy Guy Falls. There's a lot going on harmonically in every single song, and it always keeps the listener guessing. So that's everything we wanted to say about Mario Kart 8's soundtrack. What makes it so interesting is its hidden complexity and the execution. At the start of the video, we asked, what exactly makes video game music so great? I'm not even sure that's the right question to ask, because at the end of the day, regardless of any amount of analysis done, music is a creative art. And as such, it's all down to opinion. Does the variety in instrumentation and crazy modulation make the soundtrack better than one that sticks to piano and vocals with simple chords in C major? No. But it certainly makes it more interesting to analyze. In conclusion, Cheeseland. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it, and if you want to give us some feedback on this series, then leave a comment down below. You should also subscribe to stay up to date with the series and the channel. And if you want to watch some more videos, you can click on that left video to listen to a Toad Harbor 8-bit remix. You know what? True facts, I don't know anything about music. But you know what? I do know about bootleg games, so if you want to see some Donkey Kong bootleg games, click on the video on the right side to see something that I've done. It might bring you happiness and joy to see my pain.